I'd like to introduce our two panelists, with the panel topic being making better use of data to drive operational efficiency in today's remote reality. So there's Mike Brown, who's the EVP of Technology and Innovation, SMS Equipment, and Allison Hawley, Reliability Engineer, Asset Health Lead at Tech Resources. And I will be asking questions and also looking through the chat for any questions that come up or anyone who would like to ask a question. And let's try to make this as interactive as we can. And we'll be going until about 45 minutes from now. So Mike, can you kick us off and say a little bit about yourself and your perspective on this topic?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Marcus. So I'm Mike Brown. I work for SMS Equipment. For those of you who don't know, SMS Equipment are a equipment dealer in the mining industry, heavy equipment, mobile fleet. We supply the equipment and along with the technology and data systems to help optimize and drive performance in that equipment. I've spent the first 20 years of my career managing and doing data solutions and analytics type systems in the oil and gas industry, really to always optimize plant performance. About 10 years ago, moved more into the mining industry, and at SMS as managing the technology and innovation area. I have all of the smart construction programs, so all of the how we manage data across our construction fleets, our construction equipments, telematics, automatic machine control, and also on the mining side for our AHS systems, equipment health monitoring, operational analytics, this area. So this is an area that's very passionate about, and I've seen it from different lenses, and there's lots of opportunities, so very exciting space. Maybe I'll turn it over to Allison. She can introduce herself, and then Marcus, if you want us to kick it off with a few thoughts about the space, we can do that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so Allison Hawley, I am currently the Asset Health Lead for Tech Resources. A little bit of background on me: I've been in and out of mining since about 2010, so about 10 years now. And my experience kind of in this area has been largely at tech. So starting at a greenfield site to implement an asset health program. And then I've then transitioned into a more central role. And I now lead a team that does the, I don't want to call it integrated operations, but a centralized asset health program.
Thanks, Allison. And I think we're fortunate to have a couple different perspectives. So a perspective of working for a mining company and also as an OEM and vendor to the mining companies. My first question is about collaboration, because I think that one of the things that came up in the earlier presentations is you're not going to have all your data from one place. And as an OEM who's providing services, you need to get the data to be able to do that. And as a mining company, you need to be able to work with multiple different data points, and it needs to be effective and functional for you to be able to provide some type of data science solutions. Can you provide some either best practices or thoughts about what you need from the other party? What do you need from your vendors, and what do you need from your mining clients? Allison, I'll go to you first.
Sure, yeah. So this is a pretty big pain point for us. Because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We always want to leverage what's available from the vendors. So typically what I ask is that their data is agnostic in some capacity, that we're able to integrate it with our own systems. As we really want to provide a cohesive front end to our sites and the people that need to take action. So avoiding having 15 different systems that they need to flip back and forth to find action is really at the end of the day the request. So from a vendor's perspective, that is, being able to push data into our system rather than always using their front end and having a good communication back and forth between the two. And from a site perspective, integrating tools into their site that are open to multiple backends.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, you just kind of add to that. I think there's a mindset that is, I think we're slowly maturing in the business. I remember 10 years ago, OEMs would say, well, we should manage all that data because we understand that better than everybody. And the reality is OEMs understand their data extremely well because it's their assets and whatnot. But owner operators have a different perspective on that data as it relates to the operation within their field, within their operations, and how that data, what it actually means to that equipment. And I think those two things really have to come together. And I think if we can get the organizations coming together and respecting that and understanding that, we can make way better use of this data. So how do we have to do that? I think OEMs have to understand that open APIs and open access to the data is critical, okay? And that's actually going to just benefit everybody. So that's where that mindset shift has to happen, and you're starting to see some of that. So that whole area of interoperability, I think, is absolutely key. I think the other thing going beyond interoperability to just access of the data, it's now developing standard protocols on the data exchange so that different systems can start to share the data. What's starting to happen now with AHS automation systems, you're getting systems that are using the data in a specific way, and other systems want to start to use this data. And that doesn't require just open access to the data. It requires standard interoperable protocols so that you can have exchange of the data between different digital systems. And I think that when we get to that, I think we're going to get kind of a step change on how that data can really drive value for the company and for the OEMs.
Mike, I'll take off on that one a little bit, which is I think there's probably some other industries, maybe ones that are more natively digital than mining is, that have done a good job of managing their open APIs and how vendors can plug in. When you look outside the mining industry, are there other industries that you or companies that you look at as models that we should be reflecting on? And also, at any point, if anyone has a question, just put it in the side. I don't need to ask all the questions. You won't hurt my feelings. But back to you, Mike.
Yeah, I think for sure. Actually, I would offer up that the mining industry in this space is probably about anywhere between 10 to 15 years behind the processing industry and the oil and gas industry. My background was there, and standards like OPC interfaces for standard systems to be able to work together to both exchange data, and OPC UA, and where they have now embedded data security and data models associated with it. That ability to understand how to have standard protocols to exchange and structure the data so that everybody can plug and play with it, I think is important. And the mining industry has been just very slow to understand that. Now, my encouragement for the mining industry is always not to try and go out and try and define that from scratch. There's some really good things out there that exist in other industries. And so just take it and leverage it. And companies like Syncrude, Suncor that have an oil and gas operation are very familiar with these tools, and they need to bring that into the mining side to accelerate our abilities in that mining side. They're in a perfect position to kind of lead some of that charge. So yeah, there's a big opportunity there for sure.
Allison? Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. So I totally agree. We have to look outside of mining. And when I'm solutioning, I try to look at what industries have certain strengths. So when it comes to making data actionable, processing is by far been had the best practices in that area. But if we're looking at something like data science, that's still really new to heavy industry. So I look at people doing consumer marketing and targeted ads. They have excellent data science standards and using their techniques and their platforms to do that. Whereas something like event handling, IT, ticket management, anyone that's doing customer complaints, they have a more standardized approach to how they handle that. So, we don't need to have a one-size-fits-all platform and trying to pick the pieces that fit as we need them.
One thing that has also come up a little bit for me throughout the presentations today is that in the mining industry, we're often doing use case specific things. So we're doing tests and we're validating the economic benefit and the business case and that it works. And at one point, I think we're going to want to really start to scale these tests into not just purely on-site projects, but between sites, between mining companies. Allison, what do you think could incentivize more scalability between these and maybe more collaboration between not just one mining companies and their different sites, but between multiple mining companies?
Yeah, so on this one, I'll speak just to my experience, what's been successful for us. So we took a platform that was based at one greenfield site, and that is now our corporate standard. And the lever that we found to really drive that was sharing SME experience. So building in context and knowledge into the platform in a way that the two were not separable anymore really drove people to using the same platform and allowing it to be more collaborative. But you really have to find a need that is universal and finding a way to leverage it.
Nice, Mike.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we're seeing areas where, if you take a truck as an example, a haul truck, when you start to look at data access and the different systems, there'll be a company that delivers the engine for those trucks, and they'll have their own monitoring system. And then you'll have the OEM who delivers the truck, and they'll have their own monitoring system around the chassis. And then you'll have the drive, and there'll be a company that delivers that drive, and they'll have their own monitoring system. And you have all these silos that kind of exist that all provide value in their own right. But understanding of how do you bring that information together in standard platforms and ways and in simple ways so that that information can be seen as a whole now provides, I think, more of a platform programmatic approach that people can take to the problem they're trying to solve. And I think we're getting there, but there's still a lot of work that has to be, I think, has to be done in that space to understand that. And data access, data structure, Mark in one of his presentations talked about the importance of data management. Martin talked about the importance of operational data infrastructure. That's all about how do you put structure around what you're trying to do so that this problem is both scalable and sustainable, right? And I think that's what we have to figure out.
So we have our first question, and it's on the subject of open data from Dimpy Bala. And it is to Mike, but I'm going to ask Allison her perspective on open data afterwards. But Mike, when you say open access to data, do you mean access to the private entities and partners or to the public as well? Does that include sharing data on Kaggle or other type like open platforms?
To me, I take a very pragmatic view of it. I look and say, how does that data have to be open enough so that we can drive the improvements and the performance improvements that the owners of the assets are looking for? Okay, like that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. So now, when a company develops, say, an autonomous haulage system, okay, I don't expect them to have to share all the data around autonomous haulage so that somebody can take that data and reverse engineer and create their own autonomous haulage. That's IP. Okay, so I think everybody understands that people who have spent the time and the investment to develop these systems should be able to retain the data that protects their IP. But the data that's coming out of these systems operationally that can help people better get value out of those assets, that's data you have to share. Now, if you can share it across a well-defined structure and an open API and an acceptable protocol, I think it's a lot easier to share, and it's a lot easier for other people to consume because people aren't then imposing requirements and added work and whatnot on what has to happen for that exchange to happen. Okay, but I think that when I talk about open, that's what I talk about, some of that open requirements.
This is a question for Allison because it's mine specific, but in the community where I live, there's multiple different mines, and some of them are one company, some of them are another. There's a bunch of mines, and what you find often is when you go from one to the other, and you ask them, "Hey, what are you doing about this?" Because here's what's happening with this other mine in town. They don't know. So when we talk about open data, we're not exclusively talking about open data that's external to the public and with vendors, but even internal open data. And I wonder whether that's something that you guys have thought about in terms of how you even communicate internally, because I think as one of the presentations said, so much stuff's in spreadsheets. It's not all IoT data that we're dealing with. So what are some things that you've encountered in terms of just being able to communicate more clearly internally?
Yeah, so I will always lean on software to fix problems where I can, and that's kind of been my own approach. But so we actually are in a similar situation. We have 4 mines that are all in a 50 or 100-kilometer radius, and look back even 5 years ago, and you didn't even always know who was at the mine next door. And today, by implementing a standard real-time monitoring solution, we've addressed a big chunk of that. We're only halfway through that journey, but by having everyone in the same tools and developing in the same area, we're now monitoring the same things across all the valley, and it's become easier to share even with our counterparts in South America, where we don't use 2 different dashboards to monitor one type of truck. Standardizing that tool set and having people build into that collectively, rather than giving, an over-reliance on site autonomy for innovation.
Have you run across this, Mike? Because that seems like it's quite advanced for a mining company. I don't think that's always the case. Is that exceptional to you, or is that you always run across companies that are doing that well?
That's still an area that I think there's some work to be done. I don't think it's very well done across the board. No.
So I'm going to ask some questions from the group. So this is from Serini, and it says, OEMs turn the data through their algorithms and generate alarms and reports on their cloud servers, but are not ready to provide these algorithms to be run in our internal systems to generate the same alarms and reports. How do we handle this?
Maybe I'll take a crack at that. So I think that the data and the systems need to allow, if OEMs have developed a suite of analytics and tools that they can then package up and sell to owner-operators to take in data, generate alerts and alarms, and then generate whatever recommendations or actions they recommend off of their expertise on that equipment, I think that's fair game, okay? I would hope that those systems are open enough so that the owner-operators can also, from their experience and understanding of their equipment and operation of equipment, add in a common structure, add in their own experience and expertise and understanding of this. I think that's kind of the perfect world, okay? When people spend time to develop algorithms, or people spend time to develop expertise around that, let's face it, everyone's trying to understand how to monetize the data and monetize their expertise, because everyone's trying to run a business, okay? So, companies are going to have to understand their own commercial and their own business model, and OEMs are going to have to understand that in terms of, do they sell that analytics, okay? Or do they open it up for their customers? Whatever they feel is going to best grow and help their business, they're going to be able to do. I think the bigger issue is if they prevent the data access, and I think the bigger issue is if they prevent these systems from allowing the customers to expand and augment onto these systems. That's the bigger problem. It'd be good to get Allison's take on that. She's on that side, so that's my sense of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So this is something that has been a difficult relationship to establish. Of, we want that support from the vendors and for them to provide us algorithms and alerts, and we want to provide our learnings back. But where the tricky part is we need that data to confirm what we see. So we have to have access to that raw data alongside it. And the second thing we need to do is not to be pushing the alerts from the OEM directly to the person taking action. We need a level of filtering. And that data that we do that filtering on is just not something that most vendors have asked for. So, is that truck currently down for maintenance? I can't tell you how many alarms that I've gotten from OEMs where that truck is in a shop and a mechanic's got it half apart. And so we have to be able to integrate these with our system so we can do that additional, gut check of, is there low fuel rail pressure because there's no gas in the tank?
Yes, sorry, this is Srini who I asked this question. The other challenge here is like the way Allison was saying, we want to have one system. We cannot implement every system for different vendor. Now, as a company, we have already invested in building a historian database, like was Mark explaining. We have a PI system. We want every data, operational data going into PI. Now, OEM vendor 1 comes and says, no, you give me the data in a different database. I'm going to put my analytics on it and give you the reports. Vendor 2 comes and says the same thing. So we cannot keep investing in different data marts, right? So that is where we are saying, no, we already have a data historian. Give us your algorithm, put our algorithm on our system and generate the same alarms and reports. That is what we are trying to get to. We are working on it.
Yeah, the data access should be according to open APIs, and I think that's the way people need to go. It's going to benefit both sides, and I think most people understand that, hopefully. And I know other industry sectors have just kind of excelled with that for years, so that shouldn't be an obstacle anymore.
If I may add here, this is Martin speaking. I mean, I'm having discussions with a lot of OEM vendors also. I mean, of course, I mean, a lot of mining companies are using the PI system. A lot of mining companies want to have their data in their system because they want to do something with it. They want to do analytics on top of it. I think this is changing eventually. Most OEM vendors will eventually accept sharing their data. A very good example is with Caterpillar. I mean, they have just launched their product that actually is sending all the VIMS data from the trucks directly into the PI system. So this is a very good example. So and now customers are starting to implement it in many different areas of the world. Caterpillar is also offering professional services to provide templates, I mean, digital representation of their trucks so that people can buy those templates and implement it into their PI system if they want to do their own analytics. So this is changing. I think Caterpillar is a leader in that direction, but I am having discussions with other OEM vendors around the world, and they're all looking into it now. I would not specify any other names because they're not ready to share that yet, but I would say a lot of vendors are actually looking into it. And now the next step, if I can share, is about community sharing, about data sharing amongst the community. And this is part of the strategic plan that our founder has put in place. And basically, I mean, Pat Kennedy is saying that, and that's what we're working towards. I mean, being able, I mean, if you're a mining company and you are using trucks from this OEM vendor, I mean, why isn't it possible today to share information between you and the vendor from a community engagement, so that whenever there's a part that is going to fail in your truck, I mean, the vendor, if the vendor is already aware and sends that information or sends that to the distributor, so that the distributor would send you the part, and then before it even fails, you receive that part. So it becomes really a community engagement, and that's what we're working towards. I mean, but again, in order for this to work, there's a need to have data sharing and openness. So that's what we call community engagement, and that's what we're looking towards providing in the near future. But again, it's early in the process, but this is what's coming next, I would assume.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, Marcus, maybe I'll just make one comment on that. I also think people need to be a little bit patient with the OEMs, because one of the things that happens is as they generate systems that generate more data, the speed at which we're generating data and the complexity of that data is almost going faster now than our ability to understand how to drive open data structure. Okay, and I'll give you an example. So an AHS system contains a massive amount of data now on every one of these trucks. There's 20 LiDARs around every one of these trucks that are collecting information around all the roads. And I got a call not that long ago from somebody at Tech, a good friend of mine, said, "Hey Mike, we'd like to get the data off the AHS trucks and around those LiDARs and radars to start. Well, you know, when the OEMs built those systems, they never even planned for that data to be then shareable in an open format. Okay, that is part of the critical safety control system on the truck. So there's a fair amount of work still for them to understand, how do they make that data accessible? How do they structure it? How do they just give what's required for the owner operator? So, you know, I think we have to be patient a little bit with each other sometimes in this area, because what seems so obvious to some people, there's a lot of complexity under the sheets here on how to actually do this right. So sometimes we don't fully appreciate that, but I've been in the middle of those debates, and they can get quite complicated.
What do you think, Allison?
I was on the other side of that call in the background. So I maybe will refrain from commenting on that one.
There's something else that maybe Adam Dolmage, he made a comment on the side, and I think it has a lot to do with not just the raw data, but what happens with the collaboration of like what you do with the data and different layers of data. He brings up questions about intellectual property. Adam, do you want to clarify your question?
Yeah, I didn't. It wasn't really. It was more of a statement, I guess. Just touching back on what Mike said earlier, just about, you know, the sharing of data, and I think a lot of the OEMs are just hesitant to share some of that data. So there's the fine line between the actual IP and data that could be openly shared, because when you start sharing everything, you know, you're giving up your IP to your competitors potentially. So I think that's just, you know, where is that line drawn, and how much, you know, how much is too much to share, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that I have a selfish perspective on this one of, you know, I want to see it all because that's how we're going to be able to best run our business. But I understand that's not always realistic. So I think this is something that there hasn't been a precedent set of where that line is, and we'll likely see that come to fruition in the next few years.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know is the answer.
And I think the progress to that is by OEMs and owner operators continuing to communicate and talk. Like the only way this settles is for them to be able to see value on both sides. Both sides have to somehow look at what we're trying to do and say, how do both sides gain benefit from this? Okay, and you know, I'm always typically the person stuck in the middle. Honestly, as a dealer, we have the OEM on one side of us, and we have the owner operator on the other side, and we're trying to often broker these discussions. And I'm always saying, look, the best way to find common ground is to put yourself in almost in the other person's shoes and say, what can you do to help them? Okay, and if you can do this around some of these discussions around data share and data openness and data access, I think you make a lot better progress a lot faster.
Thanks. We have another question. This is from Zoli, and it's to Allison, and it's specific to, did you have a common taxonomy for standardizing your real-time monitoring system before you implemented, or did your OTM drive standardized definitions?
Sorry, can you just OTM, the acronym?
Oh, that's like your vendor.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we built our system fully in-house, and that's not an approach that's realistic for most people. We just happen to be a large enough company to be able to do that. So we standardized the front end, and that is the only piece that's been standardized. Everything back end is custom depending on the input data, but that really drives that, where am I going with this? A lot of that collaboration piece, right? So it doesn't matter who the vendor is, we're taking the same approach for how we build a community of practice, knowledge capture, and action the data. So that is the only standardization that we have done, and it was driven internally by the business need.
And what, I know the question was for Allison, but Mike, is that common? Or is that pretty unique that they would have done that?
Well, I think companies need to define their data management structure and plan, especially today. You know, back in the day when we were exchanging real-time data in a tag time value, that was it perspective, storing this in historians. It was pretty clear, simple, whatnot. We have so much data now in terms of structured, unstructured video data, the amount of video data that we're now moving, the amount of even kind of noise data that we're starting to move now that needs to be stored and understood and used in some of the analytics that we're looking at. This is creating a real need to get that whole data management, data structure thing done. And I think companies, because it brings in so many different parts, I don't think there is an OTM or one company that's going to define all that. I think companies have to figure out how they want to manage that in their business. And it's got to be kind of a core part of anybody who leads a digital transformation manager like Mark from Syncrude or whatever, and he touched on the need to do this. I think that's going to be critical. Companies have to do this now.
And you think it should be something that's individual to each company, and does it need to be individual to each company, or should it be an industry-wide thing?
No, I think, I think this is where companies like GMG, if you look at again, going back to some other industry sectors, okay, so we've looked at that problem from the process industries through things like ISA and ISA 95 and some of these data structures and whatnot and hierarchies and, even things like, how you define tag names and whatnot. Like so much of that got standardized. And I think organizations have to get together and come together with OEMs, operators, whatnot, to try and help develop and move that body of work forward as quickly as possible. So companies have a reference to it, okay, and can start. Now they might tweak it a little bit here and there for some of their own specific needs, but I think the more we can drive kind of common industry practice in that area, I think it's just going to help everybody.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that one. The amount of time and effort we've spent just making a Cat and Komatsu truck look the same from a data perspective is huge. And it's really been a barrier for us moving forward in a lot of areas. It ends up being a lot of rework.
So, okay, so where we are now, I think we all agree that you need open APIs. You need the minds to define those open APIs and really adhere to an information model that they can connect with their vendors, so you can make that connection a lot easier. Is that are we at that point? Do we agree on that? And what then? So once we do that, what's the next step?
Well, I think ultimately you want to take all this analysis that we're doing on actions and whatnot and start to close the loop on it, right? So the next step is automation, right? Is to take these recommendations, these practices, and whether it's in automated workflows or whether it's automation directly to the machines or whatnot, I think automation, right? And I think, again, if we're looking at that next step of progress, it's really getting those interfaces, those protocols, those APIs able to sustain that level of data exchange and data transfer, okay, so that we can all kind of get to that next level. Like everyone's trying to, reduce the number of, people it takes us to run these mines and to do things and become more efficient and that's going to be a big one. That's going to be a big one, I think. Okay. I think the only other area I'd bring up, and then I'll turn over to Allison for her comments, is one of the things I see definitely in the mining industry is we still have a lot of work to do in combining people with that physical domain expertise with the whole data science and data capability. That gap is still too large. Okay, Mark touched on it earlier in terms of how he's building out that COE for some of the data science stuff, but really bringing in the operational units. Mining is a physical system. We run trucks, shovels, geology, whatnot. We don't run marketing data. We don't run banking data where there's no physical systems at the base of all this sort of stuff. So we have people with really good expertise that understand these physical systems and understand how these physical systems work. And the data insight and the data analytics are really there to support that knowledge, not to try and replace it. Okay, so we need to get better systems, better tools to allow the domain experts to consume the value of data and the value of these new high-powered AI algorithms and whatnot to understand how to do a better job and then to move it to an automated state. And if we can figure that out, I think you'll see that step change. But I often get worried that somehow we're sometimes going along too much of an independent IT stream on this that almost gets disconnected from the domain expertise stream. And in our physical operational worlds, you can't do that, right? So I think that's a big area that when you talk about what's next, we got to figure that out.
I couldn't agree more. When I see someone go from data collection to talking about data science in a 1-year time frame, it's a big red flag for me. There's a lot of things that happen in between, and for us, that's self-service analytics. Bridging that gap between someone that is a subject matter expert and being able to move along that journey towards this advanced analytics and automation. Self-service tools has been able to close a lot of that gap. So if you take someone that is a mechanic, and this is something that we're doing today, someone that is a mechanic or an electrician by trade, and you're getting them to be able to run a, what are they called, a regression algorithm, some like really somewhere in between statistics and machine learning. The rate that you're able to develop new algorithms is tenfold compared to a team of data scientists, because they're going through that gut check in real time, and they already have a really good starting place. They know what is going to predict failure, and they know what the equipment needs to run more optimally, and they just need to turn that into data. So we've seen a really good success with that.
Do you think we have a bit of a disadvantage in attracting data scientists in mining, really on account of not everywhere has perfect data? And if these people were to go to Facebook or Google, the data is by and large fully digital and it's all structured, and they can impact it right away and probably to a larger audience. You can benefit 1 billion people rather than the people at your mine site. Do you think the future is really about making those? Do we really need to be actively enhancing our current employees with data science, or should we be going the other way and looking at bringing people with data science expertise into mining?
I think Allison nailed it. I think the self-service analytics area and being able to bring data science and capabilities into the domain expertise world is really key. Now, you're going to have people that truly have that core data science capability to support that, but I don't think it's about building massive teams to be able to do that. It's about having a few people that can support and do this and ensure that they're matching the algorithms. But the good thing is, and it really depends on what young people want to do, whether they want to go start monitoring data to understand that people who buy skim milk buy green jelly beans. If that turns you on, then great, go do that type of stuff. But if you want to start to look at data in operational systems and physical systems and that, then there's always going to be people who can do that. But our challenge is bringing those two together in the right way, so you get the most value out of the operational improvements we're trying to drive.
So let's do one more question, because we're almost up at the time, and then we'll do our final points. And this is from Frank Hugendorn. It is understandable that operators want access to as much data as possible. Is there a precedent where OEMs charge for additional data usage licenses for expanded data sets? That is, get basic data as part of the original purchase, and you can get more by purchasing additional data usage license. That's interesting.
I'll let Allison answer that one.
I don't want to say yes to anything that's going to cost us more money. I think that's a reasonable approach, if I'm being honest, though, that whenever we go and reverse engineer and collect data on our own, there is a cost to that. So if that was being provided by the OEM at the onset, yeah, I think that's a really reasonable approach, and I hope that is the approach we get to in the future.
Yeah, if it costs an OEM money to develop and support and maintain an API, then I don't see any reason why they shouldn't sell that API.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But don't
Just
tell
small
anyone I
point.
said that. We want it for free.
Allison, we're recording this now, eh?
So we got a couple moments left. This has been really interesting. I appreciate having both your perspectives on this, and I hope that the audience got as much out of it as I did. Last points, Allison. What's the future of data and mining? And
I think the three big things that I'm just going to echo what we've already been talking about. Open data needs to be a good flow between vendor and the consumer of the data. Automation, we didn't even really get to dive into that, but that is a whole world on its own of what we can do with the data once it's in a good state. And self-serve analytics. I think those are the three big things that any company that is getting into this space needs to take a look at.
nice, Mike.
Yeah, three things, moving from data access to data structure so that we can use this data in a better way. The amount of data and the complexity of data is growing at a very rapid rate, so we have to continue to solve that. Interoperability, really good standard open APIs and protocols that everybody agrees to, and we can develop around those protocols much faster. And then the last one is tying in domain, ensuring that we're converging domain expertise, physical domain expertise of the operation of our equipment and our plants with data science, as Allison calls it, through things like self-service analytics. Absolutely key.